Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on social engineering relating to presumptions and pretexting. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Today, we will be covering presumptions and pretexting, the issues associated with pretexting, and how to combat them. We'll also cover our evolving approach to testing and training your employees. I have information security analyst Garrett Campbell here with me to tell you more, and he'll be giving you some of his anecdotes from the on-site social engineering engagements he's performed here at Trace over the years.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Garrett Campbell. I'm an information security analyst with TraceSecurity, and currently I am the on-site social engineering service owner internally. Now, basically all that means is I try to help everybody who has performed an OSC for TraceSecurity, and any major changes that are proposed to the service have to be done by me. I also make a lot of the badges for the OSCs, which are on-site social engineering engagements. I also work with some people in getting things printed and basically work on any kind of prop for any pretext that happens, right? So let's jump right into it, shall we? All right, and so we are TraceSecurity. Basically, we are a cybersecurity company that was founded in 2004, and we deliver a variety of cybersecurity assessments and technical testing reports to cater to each client's size and complexity. Now, we do this for mainly financial institutions, but we also do this for insurance agencies and healthcare organizations as well. So we've been doing this for quite some time, and we're headquartered right in the middle of the country in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and we have around 80 employees. So what exactly are we talking about? So I wanted to start with just a couple different definitions that are heavily tied to social engineering, and the first one is, of course, social engineer, which this can be an attacker posing as a trusted agent, attempting to gain access to sensitive information or proprietary information, or just the critical systems themselves. This could be anybody. This could even be somebody who's trying to get a job at your organization. It can be a variety of people. Next is probably the most important and glossed over definition associated with social engineering, and that is pretexting, which is the focus of our presentation today. And pretexting is basically a specific terminology to refer to the backstory or the narrative disguise used by social engineers who are attempting to leverage access into your organization. This is probably what we spend the most time amongst each other as analysts talking about. We will get together and talk about believable ideas and really try to develop as much of a detailed pretext as we can. And that is probably my favorite part that I get to do as the service owner for on-site social engineering, is come up with different ways to get into organizations, especially with the lockdowns this year. I enjoyed having to think of new ways to get into organizations, to use things that we didn't typically use. I thought it was a great test of our skills and our abilities to be able to still get compromises at organizations when there's less foot traffic. And then the third one is ransomware. And you cannot, basically, as I was researching everything for this webinar today, you can't really talk about social engineering without talking about ransomware and phishing. The three are kind of tangential on each other. They each play a different role in the grand scheme of committing a ransomware attack, and they really are the first attack vector for successful ransomware. Just to remind you, we also have a ransomware preparedness assessment coming out. We also have a webinar for this scheduled on August 13th, so mark your calendars. And we're going to have another information security analyst, Mitchell Berry, and then another fantastic edition of the Trace, oh, well, not edition, she's been working here for a while, but we're going to have Colette Burke on there as well, and she works with the Atlas team and helps develop our services as well. But the last thing we're going to talk about here is phishing, and a lot of you probably combat this. You do the best that you can, and we all have dealt with this. This is something that we've all seen in our everyday lives. Sometimes we see it week to week, definitely month to month for sure. But these are malicious emails sent to your employees to assist in successfully completing an on-site social engineering attack. These can be persuasive, they could be alerting, they could be a variety of things. If any of you have ever used a phishing platform to test your internal employees and have actually done some work on those modules, you can make anything these days. It's really changed a lot since I started in 2018. And moving right along to presumptions and pretexting. This is probably something I've been wanting to talk about, probably the biggest thing I've wanted to talk about for a long time with social engineering, specifically on-site social engineering. And sometimes it's really hard to convey what you want to talk about when you perform on-site social engineering, because everybody always wants to know about the disguises we use, and they are very interesting. We just don't find the same interest as the general public does on them. But I wanted to talk to them about you today, and I wanted to talk about them with you today, and basically go over some of the training tips that I give. This is something that we wanted to do as things are gradually opening up around the country. We figured it would be a great time to talk about social engineering as more normal foot traffic is returning to all branches across the 50 states of the United States. All right. And then let's see, the current state of social engineering. So the biggest threat associated with social engineering today is ransomware. Currently, it is the most anticipated loss leader for companies in 2021. And social engineering is the main way that social engineering and phishing are the top ways that ransomware gets into a corporate environment. And organizations fight those problems first and as best as they can which can be things with, it could be unpassed software, it could be password guessing are the number 2 and 3 causes with a lot of ransomware. But number 1 is definitely social engineering and phishing. This is becoming one of the biggest threats out there. If you've been following anything in the current news climate with anything out there, there's all kind of information on some of these ransomware attacks that are hitting all different countries and us domestically. A more important fact is how they're being handled. Most organizations spend less than 5% of their IT budget on trying to fight social engineering. And with some of the stats that we found and that we're going to present to you, this is just, it is something else. It's crazy to believe that it's only 5%. And since we mainly work with the financial field, we see a lot of changes in this, and we see a lot more training being done, but there's always other things that we can train our internal employees on. All right, and then something else that we've seen is the increase in on-site activity. Businesses worldwide are allowing more foot traffic back into their branches. Things are thankfully returning to as normal as possible. And on-site social engineers are just getting ready, and they're going to be coming back at full force, especially with a lot of new employees at branches as well. So here's some of the stats that we've derived from various public security reports. And in 2021, the IC3 received over 2,400 complaints identified as ransomware with adjusted losses of around $29 million. That is quite a figure, and that is during a time where people weren't really interacting with each other. Ransomware is definitely on the height, and it's not going anywhere just by watching the news headlines. Next, the average ransom paid in 2020 was $166,000, and 50% of the victims paid the ransom. It was easier to just pay than figure out what the problem was. One thing that you can always look at this is, man, it really pays to be preemptive in this. It's much cheaper to be preemptive than be reactive in a ransomware scenario. And then the average ransomware paid in Q1 of 2021 was $220K. This normal average figure for the average cost of ransomware is already going up. These are confirmed ransomware cases, and it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. And even worse, the bad actors are asking for more money because they know there's nothing we can do about it. Well, the thing is there is something preemptive that we can do about it, and it's talking about pretexting. Because it doesn't just cover on-site social engineering, it covers email phishing, social engineering. It's basically checking the backstory or checking the validity of a pretext. It's what seems to be the best emerging scenario for this. All right, and so let's get right at the starting point. Pretexting with ransomware is the first point of defense for attackers getting into your network. The Mimecast State of Email Security report found that email threats rose by 64% during 2020 alone. Emails are a huge support to social engineers attempting to access your location, and more importantly, any kind of credential information or any kind of sensitive information that they can leverage to gain more access into your network. Emails are considered the easiest way for a bad actor to get the most out of a company by doing the least amount of work. It's a very easy attack vector to have multiple attempts on, and people read email. Their eyes get fatigued of reading the same thing. There's an amazing stat in here later on about how much people have actually been clicking things more that I can't wait to share with you. But it's right here that employees are 3 times more likely to click on malicious links than they were in an office setting. It seems like people just either with boredom or lack of an authority figure over their shoulder, it seems like they are just clicking things more often. Idle hands are the devil's tools, as a lot of people say, and it looks like this stat is proving that. A growing on-site threat is also imminent, with businesses beginning to have more foot traffic as things open up. We anticipate seeing a strong return of on-site social engineering attacks. As end users become more, how do I want to say this? As end users become more aware of the situation, with email phishing and basically any kind of malware that's tried to be put through an email domain. You're seeing Symantec try to basically keep all the clickable links. I know there's some new services that are being talked about, and basically they are endpoint protection for web browsing specifically, and just trying to keep all the executables or the clickables from being able to be accessed. And this is something new. I've heard of a couple places trying to develop something like this, and hopefully it'll be another mitigating control or application that people can put in place to fight against this, but that is something that's still ongoing and something that's new. But as things do get more sophisticated on the workstation forefront, we expect to see more of an on-site threat occur. All right, so let's talk about psychological-based social engineering. Successful social engineers are more like actors and actresses than computer nerds. They study body language, voice control, group dynamics, and all of it works. We're going to show you a little bit more information from verified studies on how the psychological aspect of these attacks can be combated, and more importantly, how it's leveraged. Without proper awareness of this, how can you ever teach your employees, right? But basically, one thing that I've learned is when you have strong training programs in place, that's really the best line of defense for mitigating against an on-site social engineering attack of any kind. It also helps in mitigating against email phishing, because that is something that we perform as part of our on-site social engineering engagements. Something that I find is that whenever internal employees have been trained a good deal about cybersecurity awareness and endpoint protection, email inspection, more importantly, if they've been taught to inspect actual domain name inspection for emails that come through, if they know where an email comes from, where that information is located, if they can actually inspect the name of that domain and teach them a little bit about what naming domain or domain names are for. And this could be top level domains. If you've ever set up an email server or something like that for an organization. But basically, the thing that I've learned is the more that people are aware of something, the stronger their intuition is. If they're drilled on phishing and potential on-site social engineering engagements, it's always in the back of their mind. And strong intuition on an internal employee is one of the hardest firewalls to bypass in social engineering. Next, we're also going to talk on some psychological attack vectors here. These are basically, this is from a study from 2004 that was done with the SANS Institute. And these are 4 types of psychological attack vectors that we're going to discuss. And then I'm also going to finish with the sophisticated attack vector that is something that we've used over the course of a couple years here. And I'm going to jump fully into that. But let's start with with lively psychological attack vectors here. The first one is a careless attack. And these are basically different forms of attacks that look at the polarity of things. It looks at people who are overly kind, and then some who are overly angry or try to impose as much pressure as possible. But the first of Lively's attack vectors are the careless attack vector, which is mainly exploitable due to the indifference of implementing, using, or enforcing proper defensive countermeasures. It is often the first phase of a more complex overall attack, and the attack escalates as the attacker's knowledge expands about the target. Reconnaissance is often seen in this vector the most, so this could be dumpster diving, password theft, or physical security exploits. And with dumpster diving, in my personal experience, just to kind of go with a careless attack here, we do dumpster diving as part of another service that we perform called a comprehensive network vulnerability assessment. And if we perform that on site, sometimes we actually do dumpster dive, and we'll go through all the available trash that's there. And in the most recent one I've done this past March, I did find an actual work schedule, or basically the hours schedule for all the internal employees at a specific branch. Now, some might not think of this as much, but I haven't found one of these in a while, and it really is a great piece of social engineering uh, leverageable material, because you can already know who the managers are. The managers are going to be in a bracket of their own. You're going to know all the names of the entire staff, and you're going to be a very moldable social butterfly to this environment. You're going to know when people are going to leave. You're going to see when the work schedule is the most, and you might even see when there's going to be the least amount of people in the branch for a 2-week period. So dumpster diving still works, even with all the document shredding, everything that's performed with data destruction. We still find human error through dumpster diving. It is incredible, even in 2021. Another thing with the careless attack vector is we use the carelessness for tailgating as well. We're going to touch on that a little bit more. We're going to touch on timelines with that later, but it's most easy to tailgate when people are most careless about people coming and going into your branch. So for internal employees, when is that? That's mainly first thing in the morning, and then that is the beginning of the lunch shifts at the branch as well. Basically, when we're performing an on-site social engineering engagement, if I cannot get to if I need to attempt to tailgate in, if for some reason my cover's blown and I have to get in, I have to be there before 12:30 at their time, whatever time zone I'm in, because that's the time when I know that the least people are probably in there. There's going to be some shifts. If people are there taking a late lunch, they're already anticipating lunch. They're not going to really care about me. And they know somebody else is going to be right behind them. It's probably the most carefree time of the office. And then moving on to our second attack, which is comfort. The next psychological attack often occurs because the user is in an environment they feel comfortable in, therefore their level of threat perception is lower. Typical examples of the comfort zone attack vector could be the user's office, floor, cafeteria, etc. To gain access to this attack vector usually requires a potential bad actor exploiting one or more of the other attack vectors. This is why we as security professionals must work hard to maintain a constant multi-layered defense, because hackers often attack in depth. Impersonation is where this first starts to come in. With impersonation, basically, as it goes to pretexting, we try to only impersonate the most believable pretext possible. It could be things that we're comfortable with. That's why we typically like to go with anything that's IT related. It's very easy for us to talk over the employees that we test. It's easier for us to talk over their heads, very simply. Another thing is shoulder surfing with this, because basically you can very passively find information around an office, just looking at things like that. And then another one of these is why, I mean, basically a comfort zone attack also makes insider threats such a bigger deal. The best way to that would be to monitor their privilege levels for what access they have or what things they actually try to bump into. Next, the helpful attack vector, our third one, is on the premise that is basically made on the premise that people will generally try to be as helpful as possible, even if they do not know who they're helping. These kind of social engineers basically do whatever they can to gain access and basically be as much free labor as they can for the organization. Specifically wait until somebody is carrying something too big, wait to see somebody with their hands full, you name it. Basically, they're going to look for any kind of leverageable opportunity to be helpful and gain access in. And from that point, they could just be, oh, I'm here to help you. I don't have anything else to do. And they just might want to stick around and then try to get to that physical records room. But it's just a very advanced form of piggybacking is what it is. It's peer backing with a little bit of pretexting there. And then finally, we're going to talk about fear. Now, fear has a couple layers in and of itself, and there's some things I wanted to kind of expand upon here and talk about these different fear attack vectors that have been listed here by Lively. And basically, we have a couple of impersonation examples, and we have impersonation and conformity. And then oh yes, here we go. And then we have impersonation of conformity. And basically, conformity presents a great example of a fear-based attack. The goal here is to put the user in an uncomfortable position by being the only one not to help out a social engineer. So what this could be is if somebody's successfully gotten into a network closet here, basically, if they're trying to get somebody to log into the console who would know so, or if it's basically just trying to get them to perform anything that the bad actor needed done. So if they needed to go look something up to break the escort policy, or which is not technically conformity, but basically they're going to try to get somebody to do something because their peers are doing it. It could be based on, well, Bill's bank down the street. Well, Bill's bank down the street, they did the same, they let me into their place last week and they were having the same issues that you are. Or it's going to be a much bigger issue if you don't let me in. I already have to go back over there because they wouldn't let me in. Basically, they're trying to use your lack of knowledge and use peer pressure to make you do what they ask. Another one is the time frame technique, and basically, it's a more aggressive technique. The attack uses a fictitious deadline in order to obtain user compliance from a help desk operator. An example of this technique would be an attacker impersonating a legitimate user from the accounting division. The payroll bookkeeper is in need of some assistance for 10 minutes before close on a business on Friday evening, or basically making whatever kind of attack where time is of the absolute essence, trying to catch somebody on their way out, trying to use instant pressure that they don't have to impose themselves that is already being done by the time of day. That's really the best way to do it. It does need a lot of windows to align, but yes, it can happen. And it is basically one thing we want to talk about with time frame is that all internal employees should never be worried about time when it comes to authenticating a new visitor to the organization or things like that. Basically, time is always on the side of those who have to authenticate. They're in no hurry. They have all the time in the world. They need to authenticate somebody. And that's something we're also going to touch on a little bit more in depth later on. But going to our third one, which is importance. The attacker pretends to be somebody important or acting on the behalf of somebody important. This is probably one of our most used tactics whenever we have to perform email spoofing as part of our on-site social engineering engagement. We basically try to mask as the manager who would verify our visit and basically send a message out to all of the branch managers saying, hey, I've got this guy in from our internet service provider. He's saying that there's something wrong with the fiber optic ends in use, and there's something, I mean, he basically said that there's some kind of factory warranty on them. They could possibly crap out on us, and it looks like they're going to be defective. So I'm just going to have this person come in, and they're just going to obtain some serial numbers and just look around the communications closet to see if there's anything that could create a problem. Basically, we always try to get an authority figure, or we always try to mask as an authority figure. It's a reason why so many potential bad actors mask as CEOs. In your organization, it might even be a CEO who hasn't been there for a while, but people will still find that name in public directories and try to use it. It really is remarkable. All right. And then next, I want to talk about one of my attacks here that I've kind of come up with, which is the sophisticated attack vector. And this is something that we've done in Trace for a while. And basically, one of our most successful pretexts that we reuse rather frequently is the inspection of fiber optic cables in use. In 2008, when I first started doing this service, basically a lot of fiber optic networks are being installed across various parts of the 50 states. and you could basically see it done in residential areas a lot. I know in Louisiana it was being done a lot around here. It might have been done even sooner in your state. But the more important thing is I knew that fiber optic networks were at the anticipation of people's minds when it came to internet speed. Basically, everybody was excited about it. It was a new and emerging technology. They saw major investments to it right down the street from them. But one thing I realized is I was, basically I had to take Network Plus, and I realized that they were really only teaching us about the types of ends for fiber optic cable. It was just one of those things that wasn't well talked about. I mean, there's more information out on it now, but this was about 3 years ago. So this has worked really well, mainly because the technique really knows no bounds for size of organization or size of town that it occurs in. Over the past 3 years, say we were doing an OSE engagement in a small town. Well, if the small town didn't have fiber, we could say that we were inspecting the demarc area and doing performance statistics to see if there was enough electrical power to basically to work with the fiber optic network that we were trying to instill for this town or wherever we were doing it for. Basically, whatever story, we wanted to get past the realm of believability in people's heads. We knew we didn't have to talk about much, but basically we would build on their excitement of having a fiber optic network, or if they already had an existing fiber optic network, we would basically blame it on a factory recall and say that some of the ends were bad and that's why we needed to be there. It didn't take much. All we had to do was basically talk about sophisticated technology that didn't have a ton of information publicly available on it to get people's believability to let us into their communications closets or server rooms. This happened all over the country. It didn't matter if it was a major city. It didn't matter if it was a small town. It really worked well. And basically nobody questions. And if they did ask any questions, well, what do we do at TraceSecurity? We would basically improv excuses for why this would happen. And basically it could be, oh, well, they just need to be polished a little bit, or I just need to write down these serial numbers to get them to the accounting department to actually process, to process these numbers and see if they're part of a larger recall of these parts. Basically, anytime that somebody questioned us, we would basically mitigate the attention onto something else. We would say that, oh, well, if you already have a fiber optic network, then we have to do this because there's a recall. Or if you don't have one yet, oh, well, this is what we have to do to make sure that the network works well, or to make sure that we have enough statistics to have the company install fiber here. We just want to see if if it's not too far from our main fiber hub that we've installed later or closer in town. We just want to actually measure the distance there. All we had to do was play in the realm of believability on on any of the internal employees that we were testing with it. All right. And then how to combat pretexting. This is always everybody's question. What can I do? I already do cybersecurity training. I'm considering doing an OSE assessment, but I really want to make sure that everybody's ready. Well, this is why we brought you here. We want to talk about a couple different ways that you can combat pretexting successfully. All right, so in a study performed by Thomas C. Omerod and Coral J. Dando, these researchers found that reading body language doesn't really seem to be a factor in security screening due to the results of a study finding that 50 out of 20,000 people managed to make a correct judgment with more than 80% accuracy. And this is basically trying to show that body language wasn't necessarily working. It is a terrible factor in determining someone's actual truthfulness during security screening, basically on how well they practice out their story. Anything involving acting, sometimes you'll see with theater actors as opposed to film actors. Theater actors always overact a little bit, and film acting is known for being much more subtle. Body language can be predictable. One thing I will say about body language and how it can be used to combat pretexting is basically when I was about 8 years ago, I had a friend who would do loss prevention work for a very popular sporting goods franchise here along the Gulf Coast. And basically, body language is useful in a certain aspect. When I read some of these articles on how body language wasn't useful anymore, I did think that it was being it was looking too broad. And this is actually pretty great for any of our clients in that it is okay to use body language in the right ways. And what I would say is when I was working with my friend who was a loss prevention officer, I basically worked with him. I basically would go and help him a couple times out of the year and help him catch people who were shoplifting. And one thing that he taught me, he would create little windows that he could see different points of the store at almost any time. And he knew a lot if somebody was going to shoplift based on their body language. And it's the same, and it made perfect sense. It makes a lot more sense to me now because I've had to train people to do social engineering engagements. And basically, people who know they're up to no good have more pressure on them than everybody they try to impose pressure on. So I'll say that again. Basically, it's easier to read the body language of a bad actor because they know that they are not doing well. They're doing something that's not, that is very risky or can have dire consequences for them. So they're going to naturally be under more pressure. The only way this isn't the case is if this person is a highly seasoned criminal of some kind, if they either that or they're just one of the smoothest operators around. But even still, even if you're too smooth of an operator, your ego is going to get in the way. And once people's egos get in the way, they're either going to start getting nervous or vice versa. They're going to get angry. But basically, body language is good. If you know somebody's up to no good, they're going to be under a lot of stress. They might even be sweating. And so one thing that we're going to touch on further is actually testing the pretext of somebody, just asking them a little bit more about their story, make them improv further. Another way to combat pretexting is veracity. The veracity or accuracy with which people respond to security screening questions is a much better indicator of truthfulness. It actually not text, but tests the pretext of your potential bad actor. You want to test their story. Um, One thing that I always preach over here at TraceSecurity is what's the golden rule of improvisation, and that's to always say yes. Whenever you have to improv with somebody else, or if you know anybody who's ever done improv training in a professional setting, basically when you have two people who have to improv off of one another, they're supposed to constantly say yes to each other to bail each other out. So that way, if one is running out of ideas to do, the other one can be like, oh, well, yes, that's what I thought I was doing. They basically just keep bouncing off each other to keep it going. Now, only a very sophisticated improvisationalist can do that. So the best thing is to ask constantly, while you're escorting them, constantly ask them things about what they do, what's going on in their job, what are the emerging trends of their job. Talk shop with them, for lack of a better phrase. But testing the veracity of their story is slowly becoming the strongest way to test some of these. And we're seeing that with a recent study done in 2014 where current aviation security systems identify behavioral indicators of deception to assess risk to flights, but they lack a strong psychological basis or empirical validation. Basically, security agents were able to detect 66% of deceptive passengers using veracity testing, as opposed to less than 5% using body language. They basically the gist of it is they gave potential bad actors or security analysts, they gave them a week to come up with their pretext. They gave them a good time to actually drill their story, know their story, and then they gave them a bunch of fake credentials. So they gave them fake plane tickets, fake passports, fake IDs, and things like that. They were trying to purely show that the story was everything, and the story was really the only thing that mattered. And basically, when the international airport security agents made them tell their story backwards, they would mess it up because they remembered everything as a step-by-step basis because they were telling a lie. When they asked them to basically recite the events of their morning backwards, they would always get flubbed. They would always get messed up. They'd get flubbed up. They couldn't. They would just they would just kind of mess it up. And basically, the best way to, it wasn't until the best way to mitigate this wasn't until the in the international airport security agents were properly trained. Once they were trained to assess the story properly, they were able to up the success factor of their inquisitions. And next, we're going to talk about our evolving approach here. And basically, we wanted to give some free tips and tricks that you can have for your employees to actively text or actively check more pretexts as they happen. All right, so tips and tricks. All newcomers or strangers to a facility are the mediums of change to your working environment. Thus, they should prove their reason for being there. Don't be afraid to ask somebody who they are if you've never seen them before. This is going to be a huge deal as people start seeing new hires from that happened during COVID, as they get more people who've either moved to that area, who moved from a different part of the country. We're about to have a lot of newcomers, not only those who come into the branches, but also as internal employees. The change that has come has been inevitable, and we have to address it. Another one is more organizations have approval policies for visitors, but people want to naturally be helpful to those who appear that they are there to be helpful or come off as a providing service to a product that the organization has already paid for. People inherently want to help each other. And it's a big challenge for organizations to kind of go against the grain of what we do with our consciousness to just or we do it or we do it unconsciously, right? We want to help people. We want to be useful in our working environment. We want to be an aid to somebody, even if it's a newcomer. It's hard to go against that and train against that, but basically, you just have to, let everyone know that time is on their side. That is the best way to be about it. Time is always on whoever is authenticating and granting access to any visitor. As soon as you have to engage in an escort policy, time is on your side. You have to watch that person until they come in, make sure that you know what they're doing, take note of what they do, maybe even have maybe whoever has to do the escort should also have like a debriefing report or basically just write down what happened. We do that with time entries for work as things became more remotely, and maybe we could do that for physical visitors as well. Another thing I want to talk about, if you've ever done any kind of OSC engagement with TraceSecurity, we always are really proficient at making great work ID badges, right? And something that I never see organizations do is employees should always request and make scanned copies of the work ID present or the driver's license of the individual who's requesting physical access into your server room or any kind of physical records room. Just taking a scan of their actual driver's license or their work ID, business card, something with a picture of their face, anything that you can do. Maybe even if you don't have a scanner or you don't want your employees scanning people and putting it on file, have them take a picture of the visitor. Or if you have biometric software, they should be logged whenever they have to come in. But actually getting a scan of someone's ID, you could catch the social engineer being lazy. They could have messed up something with their name. They could have misspelled their own name. These are all little vectors that are checking the efficiency of a social engineer's pretext. Some people are human, just as human error is at the forefront of this, and the social engineer is going to make mistakes just like the internal employee is. So it's best to check each other on your mistakes. The social engineer is already checking on yours. It's best to teach your employees to check on their mistakes as well. Another thing is that when you do have time on your side and say somebody is trying to pressure the employee, say that, oh, well, I have to get somewhere, I have a lot of stops to make today. This wasn't this way when I did this last time. Well, things change and time is on your side. If they have to come back later or they have to go to dispatch to have somebody call or get an authority figure of their own to verify their visit, ask them to go do so. Tell them they're going to have to come back. If visitors become pressured or angry, assure them that this is not the place for this type of behavior or dialect. And if they're really here to do a service for us, then they're not doing the customer service side of it at all. And that is really one of the best ways to mitigate against that. If somebody doesn't want to give us access, then we want to leave, right? Kind of circling back to what I talked about where body language is useful. Basically, if somebody's that eager to leave once they see that their story is not working, they're going to be looking for a way out. I mean, that's what we train. If people aren't taking it, we basically want to try to get out there, blame it on dispatch, try to get out of the building as best as possible. That's what bad actors are going to do when they start to feel pressure. They're going to be trying to get out of there as fast as they can. But you've already got them on video. If you've taken a scan of their ID, you've already gotten, and you can show that they've already printed that badge, then you already have them as impersonating somebody. That's another crime to add to it. And then I'm sure your cameras are going to get the license plate if they don't walk up to the building, and you're also going to get their face, and you can show that they are not who they say they were on there, or that they've been doing some malicious work on physical items. All right, and now I want to talk about our evolving approach. What is TraceSecurity actively doing after presenting you with basically one of our most successful methods and talking about emerging trends in on-site social engineering? Well, it's psychologically based. That's really what I've come to know about social engineering. If you do any kind of search on social engineering, you'll basically find that it's really hard to find some things that are out of the general scope of just all the same thing. Basically, everybody talks about the same thing with social engineering. So this time around, I wanted to actually show what I actually learned as a social engineering service owner. Most of the time, I look at a lot of stuff from the American Psychological Association. It's really hard to find great stats on social engineering, but the Journal of Experimental Psychology has been doing some fantastic things. That is where the study from, I just want to get their names correct because they did such great work. That's where the study from Thomas C. Omeron and Coral J. Dando came from. And really, it's becoming, I would say that social engineering is becoming so granular that we're really having to train against our own psychological impulses. And that is where it's going to get difficult. But I think awareness is truly the only thing that can fight against that. As we became aware of this, we're basically going to start drilling improvisation a little bit more. Another thing I've actually been considering is having to actually have our analysts write out their pretext story. We want to actually create maybe a fictitious timeline for the day, knowing that they're having people recite things backwards and forwards. As far as what they did that day, things along those lines, we're just going to make our internal staff more knowledgeable of these techniques. The same thing that you're going to do. Whoever does it better is whoever is going to be more successful, correct? But basically, we're going to try to develop our pretexts a little bit more, document it, be able to write it down, memorize what we're supposed to do, get our own false procedures in place, and basically have the analysts know their pretext story inside and out. That's all we can do for that. But another thing that I have to do with the analyst team here is just we have to drill improvisation a little bit more to keep that pressure off of them. And they already do a great job. Most of them, we don't really have anybody who ever gets in. I mean, I've never had anybody call me and be afraid. All of our guys and girls are pretty fearless for the most part, and we're very thankful for that. But one thing, if you ever perform an OSC with us, is we do keep a QR on there. Just a little fun extra bit of information here, or a little bit of lagniappe, is we started putting QR codes. We would hear of certain analysts getting nervous about performing the assessments, and so we would put QR codes on there, and basically it goes direct to my phone in the office, or I can set it up to my cell phone if I'm also traveling on site. So no matter where they are in the country, as long as I'm aware of the time zone they're in, or I see that I have a call coming in, or if they let me, as long as they let me know they're about to perform an OSE, if I get a call, I can act along with their story. And that's another part that's really become that we mainly utilize it to get out of sticky situations or situations where we don't want to blow our cover, but it's very powerful, and we're definitely going to look on expanding that forward as well. We can also do a false sense of authority there. Also, we're trying to get more former industry professionals to come tell us about what they've done as an electrician, pest control, all the communications workers who would love to talk to us for the most part. Basically, anybody who's done fiber optic work, physical security professionals. We're always into hearing more case study and finding scenarios that have either actually happened to people or just finding out stories where people were basically conned in something, or a way that something was more believable because of a case study that we heard about. we're always trying to find ways of things that have happened, because if it's already happened, and if it's fooled somebody, it'll fool people again. And we just want to emulate it, but actually just develop it a little bit more. And then we also want to expand the timelines for some of our email phishing that we do as part of on-site social engineering engagement. This is something that we don't do much. We mainly will only try uh, avant-garde techniques for email spoofing and pretexting when we have an organization that has performed very well with our social engineering engagements over 2 or 3 years. Basically, they're comfortable with the process and they really want to test themselves as well. Once we find an organization that's confident in that, that's typically where we have the most fun, where we've developed a relationship with them, where we can basically try new techniques, use more interesting pretexts, and just really try to get out there and do some things differently. All right, so on to everybody's favorite part about on-site social engineering, and it's stories from the field. This first contract cover story comes from one of our directors of security services, and basically he had used a very clever pretext of disguising himself as a contractor who was coming to do some measurements for expanding out the branch. Now, everybody, as you can see, because he was coming there, because of his impersonation and how happy he was making everyone, everybody was so happy that he was there. He could have basically requested anything or asked help from anyone, and they were so happy that their branch was being expanded upon that they rolled out the red carpet for him. And after he had told me this story, the worst part is that he felt so horrible when he had to tell people that they were not getting a building expansion. But that's where social engineering testing gets very hard, is having to come clean with your lies at the end, which we always do. But another one is something that I've had. These next two are ones that have personally happened to me, and I have had something that happened not too long ago. Is I actually had a client who he had tested his own internal employees with on-site social engineering engagements, and I was very impressed by that. And I should have expected more. Well, when I say expected more, I should have known that that was not the only thing he was going to test, but his employees were very good, and basically one of them had blown my cover, and I basically told him that I was like, hey, look, you did a good job. You've caught me. I really need you to not tell, or as we call it, gophering. I need you to not tell all of the other branch managers so I can test them as well accurately for your organization. Naturally, this person didn't listen to me at all, and basically told the entire place who I was and what I was. And I talked to the point of contact, and he was like, well, I still want to do the engagement. You just need to come up with something new on the fly. At the time, I mean, me personally, I love stepping up to a challenge. I'm so glad the client did this. It was a tad frustrating for about 10 minutes, and then I realized that I could probably buy some things on the fly, and I could really have some fun and test out some new pretexts, or some pretexts that I had. Basically, we tried out they had 4 locations, and this was after the first location had been done. So for the second and third one, we masked as a security service provider and basically gave out cookies. And we're trying to get in wherever we could. I was able to get past some non-public areas with that one, but the last one was probably the best, because I figured that obviously they were telling everybody that this was going down. And so for the last one, which was the main facility, I wanted to go after the biggest facility and basically not have any story whatsoever. I was going to try to tailgate into it. I was also training an employee at the time, so it was real funny when basically thankfully we got there before 12:30. We were able to get in around lunchtime, and basically I told her, I was like, yeah, so we're just going to have a fake conversation here and talk about a bunch of nonsense until we watch somebody come out. And then we're basically going to wait until their back is to us and we're going to grab the door. That's exactly what we did. The employee actually looked back at me but didn't say anything, because guess what? He's on his way to lunch. He doesn't care about me. So it was really easy to get in there. And another thing I learned from that is you should always check a locked door. I'm kind of funny about checking RFID doors, because anybody who's in an RFID area, whenever they hear the unsuccessful opening attempt to a magnetic door, everybody always gets highly suspicious if there's not any laughing behind it or a knock. So I found out, thankfully, if we would have checked the doors, that the RFID locks did not work and the physical records area was right there. But we kept going upstairs, and this is always the biggest hazard whenever you tailgate and you start going in, when you go in dark like this, because you have to really be on top of your improvisation game. I was really thankful that the training employee was a great sport about everything, because I actually left her in a bathroom. We actually split up after we had been caught, and once the internal employees were deciding what to do with these two newcomers they had found to their office, I basically told her to go run to the bathrooms in another part of the building, and we would split up and see if they noticed. They did notice, but they couldn't find her. I told her that she had already left and went to the car, and lo and behold, I went outside, and 20 minutes later she emerged. So we were just trying to see how far we could get, but I'm so grateful that the client did do that. It really kept me on my toes. It was a great training opportunity, and it was a great challenge, and we were still able to tailgate in. We probably would have gotten the police called on us, but we were still able to check some things with their physical security. We were able to bring more awareness to perform some tailgating, and this old dog is still able to walk into any building without being seen. Well, almost without being seen, but I was able to, show off a little bit that day. So always fun. But my last story is external flags don't matter. So whenever we've used a couple different ways to perform email spoofing for on-site social engineering, and typically as DLP, well, basically as DLP features were getting better on host-based firewalls. It was getting really hard to sometimes, basically the more sophisticated the organization was, the harder it was to actually get your spoofed email into their network, to not get it cached by a really good firewall or another kind of security device or any kind of intrusion prevention system they had that was host-based. Basically, it was a lot harder. It was a lot harder to get certain things through. We'll have some engagements where the network admins and the system admins will work together to make sure that they don't have external flags. It's very hard to do just by some of the basic configurations, but thankfully, it doesn't really matter. Even if it's a big red bar, there was a bank, not a credit union, that we had done some on-site social engineering for, and I was really concerned about the external flags on this because they had told me how big they were. I had seen them whenever they replied to my emails. I could see how big they were in the reply emails, and I was like, man, this is going to be really hard to get past. Like, it's a really hard domain name to spoof. That's another thing we always have a lot of fun with, is coming up with the fake names of things, or actually writing down which character we can fake that looks easiest to the eye in smaller text. The things that security analysts talk about, right? But basically, I've been so concerned about this external flag for this place because they had trained on it, and lo and behold, one of the area managers, I got him first thing in the morning. It shows you that, so even with technical advances right here, it was the first thing in the morning. I was one of the first people to come to the branches. And because of that, the person being tested wanted to help. I basically caught him as he was making his list of things to do in the morning. And what is the first thing that you want to do in the morning whenever you have a busy Tuesday morning? You want to start checking things off your list of things to be done. You're already thinking about 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, depending on where you work, and you're already thinking about lunchtime. So time of day, even though it's called phishing, and it has never been a more truer word, because time of the day is still everything. Go ask any great fisherman, and they'll tell you if you're not up before the sun is, you're not going to catch any fish. So that's another thing that we really preach, is you should always be one of the first people to go in the morning. That's also when organizations should be most on alert, because that's most people who perform any kind of communications work. They want to get started first thing in the morning and get going. But none of the external flags mattered. This area manager let me into the communications room. I was able to take that. He didn't let me out of his site. He didn't break his escort policy, but he let me in, and I was able to get my information. Now, his intuition must have been burning him, because he totally told everybody what had happened. His intuition, he had a very guilty intuition about what he had done. And so he still told everybody. He still kind of came clean on the matter, but we were still able to get a compromise. All right, and that is all I have for my webinar on social engineering today. If you guys have any questions about this, I will be leaving. Basically, we're about to open it up to Q&A.